So, good afternoon, everyone. It's Monday today. It's the 11th of January. It's the second day of the lockdown. And I have the pleasure today to host this podcast. My guest is Dr. Natalie Alkiviadou. Natalie, welcome.
Thank you.
We will have this podcast in English today because, as I will explain, the legal work of Natalie has an international aspect and an international audience. So we hope to reach out to as many people as possible. The title of the podcast today is Free Speech, Humor, Parody and Satire. Dr. Natalie Alkiviadou published a very interesting article that I saw in Twitter last week. It was retweeted actually by Achilleas Dimitriadis, our colleague. Her article is entitled Humor, Parody and Satire, Funny Things. And I will put the link of this article in the feed below, and hopefully anyone that is interested will read it. Actually, I advise you to go and read this article because Natalie makes a deep dive into the case, the Twitter case of Lady Emily, Duchess of York and so forth, and the things that the whole incident, and she explains the legal aspect and the limits of humor, parody, and so forth. And this is what we are going to be discussing today. So this is for an introduction. Natalie, before we start, I would like you to tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do, your research, which is I found very, very interesting.
Yeah, so at the moment I'm a senior research fellow at Justitia, which is a think tank in Denmark, working on a variety of issues related to fundamental freedoms, human rights, and the rule of law. And at the moment we're running quite a big project in cooperation with the University of Columbia and the Department of Political Science at the University of Aarhus in Denmark. And we are essentially seeking to explore freedom of expression, both within the framework of research, but also within the framework of policy documents, communication with, relevant stakeholders, as we do consider that at the moment, especially within the current times of social media and restriction of speech online, freedom of expression is often let's say at risk. So yeah, that's essentially what we're doing.
Tell us a little bit about your doctoral work and your research. You first of all you studied law, right?
Yeah. So I studied law, but I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah. Okay.
We have a saying that we research or we teach what we can't practice.
You don't want to be a lawyer, or?
No.
No. Okay. So I saw that your PhD is very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about the research and the title and?
My PhD essentially looked at the far right and essentially the legal tools that can be used to tackle the far right. I used the case studies of Greece because of Golden Dawn, especially at the time of writing. I started it just a few months after Shehzad Lukman had been murdered and 2 months before Pavlos Fyssas was murdered. So it was at a time of great violence committed by Golden Dawn. And I did a comparative with England and Wales. And essentially, I looked at freedoms, particularly that of expression, and how countries view expression and how they regulate expression with the aim of tackling phenomena like right-wing extremism or the far right, which is a bit dangerous at times. Limiting expression has always got to be done very cautiously. So essentially, that's what I looked at in my PhD.
All right. So starting with the basis of this discussion about freedom of expression. So, why would you say that freedom of expression is so important in a democratic society?
It's the bulwark of liberty. It's a foundation of our democracy. It's the voice of the people. It's the voice of the marginalized. You know, when the majority wishes to oppress the minority, and these are terms that I don't like and I don't embrace. I'm just doing it for the point of discussion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The key mechanism that they can do that is by silencing what they have to say. We can see that in, for example, the history of the US and how people were silenced, or the history of South Africa during apartheid, how supposedly anti-hate laws were used to suppress the voice of the Black minority. So I think it's very, very important. I don't think that a democracy is just about us going and voting every few years. It's about us being able to speak, you know?
So there is a relationship, you say, between freedom of speech and hate speech, in the sense that even hate speech, someone should be able to express it?
Well, I think that the first point here is, what is hate speech? So there's no universally accepted definition of what hate speech is. Even on a UN level, for example, different conventions, different laws give a different threshold to what is hatred. So I can give you an example. Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights prohibits the advocacy for hatred, discrimination, and violence, right, against an ethnic or religious group. Whereas another convention of the UN, the Anti-Racist Convention, Article 4 therein, simply prohibits all racist ideas. So that the threshold is much lower. So there is no actual definition of what hate speech is. That's the first thing. And this, of course, opens the floodgates to states like Germany, which we can discuss later on, or platforms like Facebook and Twitter and other platforms, to decipher for themselves what hate speech is, and subsequently limit what should actually be freedom of expression. So it's not that I'm promoting, you know, people having hateful ideas and let's all hate each other. But I don't see how the restriction of expression is always the solution. There are so many factors in the social strata of our society that we need to tackle before we actually get to the framework of hate. Okay,
all right. Tonia sent us a message about the sound. I don't know if we have a problem. I think we are okay. So if any of our viewers and listeners cannot hear us, let me know here by sending a message. Let's start with this Twitter incident we had in Cyprus that caused you to write this article. So generally, I mean, what is the flavor, before we go into the details, that you got from this whole incident? I mean, as a country, are we, do we cultivate freedom of expression? Do you think we are a closed society? What is your feeling about that?
I think we're behind on cultivating a lot of things, not only expression. I wouldn't go as far as saying that, you know, we are living in some kind of arbitrary state whereby we have no freedom of speech. Otherwise, you know, we wouldn't be having this podcast now. Yeah. But I do feel that, you know, it's the particular incident was particularly arbitrary. And it really frustrated me. And I can't say that I can give you a plethora of examples which frustrated me as much. So I do think that increasingly there is a potential censorship, and it's not only in this country. We see this, you know, in quite a few. But I can't speak generally. I can speak that particular incident was not good for free speech, not good for human rights.
So in your article, you start by making a reference to ancient Greece, and you talk about the concept of parousia and isigoria, right?
Yeah.
Isigoria, I understand what it is, but parousia, I didn't know that it had this meaning. Can you give us an explanation about this? Talk about this a little bit, about the origins of the freedom of speech.
Yeah. So if we turn to ancient Greece, we have, quite a few thinkers, looking at free speech. Different thinkers had different ideas in terms of the limits of speech. We see variations even between, teachers and students of ancient Greece in terms of the limits of freedom of expression. In terms of parrhesia, I would go with the way Foucault has interpreted it, essentially meaning free speech. But without isigoria, there's not much substance to it, because it's not only about the existence of free speech, it's also about all our equal access to it. So free speech per se is not sufficient in order to contribute to the kind of democracy we said. We all have to have equal access. So it's two parts, I would say.
So for our international viewers, it is advisable to read your article to get the background about the actual case that we are discussing. And basically, there is a Twitter account, which is a parody account, that satirizes the Minister of Justice. The Minister of Justice made a complaint to the police, and the police issued a search warrant, and they got the computer and laptop and the cell phones of somebody in Larnaca. At the end of the day, that was not the person. The minister withdrew the complaint, and on the basis of that, we are discussing. Natalie wrote the article, and we are having this discussion. And you say that in terms of European law, and I didn't know this, to be honest, you say that the Court of Justice held that the concept of parody is an autonomous concept of EU law. So I want to talk a little bit about this. I think it's very important, isn't it? So what is parody, first of all? What is satire? What is humor? Can we define these concepts?
Legally, again, we don't see any of the courts actually, regional courts, especially the European Court of Human Rights, avoid definitions. And this is particularly because of the doctrine of the margin of appreciation granted to states parties to interpret things, in line with their local realities. So I don't think that we can actually give definitions per se. What we can say is that things like satire, parody, humor, they're all framed in the ambit of arts, in the ambit of expression, in the ambit of, this kind of, cultural aspect. So that's how the courts have approached these kind of themes. Like with hate speech, they don't actually give definitions.
Yeah. So Nicoletta sent us a message, our colleague Nicoletta Haralambidou. She's a lawyer and she's an activist as well. And she says there is no legal definition of hate speech. The Council of Europe adopted definition reflecting the case law of human rights. In 1997, the Committee of Ministers adopted a recommendation on hate speech, which stated the term shall be understood as covering all forms of expression which spread, incite, promote, or justify racial hatred, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, or other forms of hatred based on intolerance, including intolerance, etc. Okay, so
that's problematic, though. That's a problematic definition of the Committee of Ministers, I would say.
Why?
Because it leaves out a major part of. It kind of creates a hierarchy of hate. We talk about anti-Semitism, we talk about ethnic minorities. Well, I'm sorry, but the LGBT community is also a target of hate. A trans woman, a trans man, a lesbian, they are also targets. And what we see on an international and European framework is that we have no essential protection of this particular group. What we have seen at the European Court level, European Court of Human Rights, is essentially 3 cases on what we call homophobic speech. So that 1997 definition is anyhow a non-binding document of the Committee of Ministers. Of course, it's important. I agree. Anything that we can take from the Committee of Ministers. We have a 2019 case of the European Court of Human Rights, which tries to deconstruct what hate speech is, but doesn't actually define it. These are all important stuff. But we have to be very, very careful because a lot of this stuff often represents temporal issues. For example, a focus on anti-Semitism, let's say, doesn't consider other groups which may be targets of speech. So I would be very, very careful when actually defining hate speech and embracing a definition.
Okay, so let's go back to parody accounts, Natalie. At the European level, do we have cases from the Court of Justice that discuss this issue, parody accounts, humor, and so forth? Like for example, do we have an analogous case with a politician and so forth?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple of cases at the European Court of Human Rights. So in Strasbourg, we have a case, the Austrian case, which I put it in front of me to try and pronounce it, but I can't. It's Kunstler versus Austria. It's a 2007 case, and essentially there was an exhibition in Austria whereby there was an art, a painting, a satirical painting called The Apocalypse. And in that painting, we had members of the far-right Austrian party in the painting, along with certain other figures. Figures like, for example, Mother Teresa and whatever. The political, some of the political figures of the Austrian party essentially said that this was bad. And the European Court of Human Rights was like, well, you know what, this is satire. Satire is a form of artistic expression. Artistic expression falls within the ambit of freedom of expression. And politicians, you know, your private life isn't as private as, you know, the rest of us. So you just need to put up with it. So that's one of the cases that I think is, okay, it's not online, it's not Twitter, it's not about a duchess. I mean, it's about artistic expression, but it's satire. And also another case with Portugal.
So, okay, let me post, first of all, this Küssler case, I think is the correct pronunciation.
Küssler, okay.
I'm not sure though, but it looks okay. So I have put the link there. I got it from your article. So did you follow this case with the teacher that is also an artist, Gavril, that was doing some paintings? So is it the same situation, this case? I mean, this guy is under disciplinary proceedings now because he painted these things.
Yeah, and that's not
What
good.
is your take on that?
My take is exactly as my take is on the Twitter situation. I mean, I think we are beyond the era of blasphemy and beyond the era of majoritarian belief, and within a framework of, you know, expression and acceptance and tolerance. So yeah, my position on that is the same as with the Duchess case.
Okay, so you were talking about parody, and I interrupted you. I think isn't there a case which is identical or similar with the one that we are talking about, or not?
Well, I mean, the Austrian case is very similar, given that it's, you know, with politicians. We have the Portuguese case where, again, it was offline speech. It was parody, it was satire, but it was offline. So the difference is the medium. But we still have to maintain, you know, the legal aspects of, you know, the protection of free speech and parody.
Yes, but Natalie, if somebody is a politician, I mean, does this give a free hand to everybody else to mock him, satire him, and, you know, make fun of him or her? I mean, aren't there any limits at all in the humor and in this type of things?
There are limits to humor under the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, but the limits arise only when the parody, the satire, the humor is directed to protected characteristics. Like ethnicity, race, religion, and it's a very famous case. I'm not sure if you know the comedian Bala. He's a very controversial French comedian, and he had done a show which was considered highly anti-Semitic. So he had an actor coming onto the stage with a star, and then he had a revisionist talking. Anyway, it was a very, very controversial case. And there the European Court of Human Rights said, no, this is a limit. We're not even going to consider your case. We're kicking it out because it's abused, the fundamental, rights of Jewish people. So, yeah.
So we have protected characteristics like race, ethnicity. What else?
Religion,
gender.
Gender identity. We've had it. In a 2019 case, we've had sexual orientation, for example, the case of Veland versus Sweden, the case of Beizaras versus Lithuania. We've had different, protected characteristics.
So if the specific parody account was making fun of the minister's let's say, religion, would that be something off limits?
Depends in what way. So I can give you an example. There is a case before the European Court of Human Rights, the case of Ferrer versus Belgium, whereby it was a politician actually giving out leaflets with different cartoons on, which linked Islam with terrorism in a kind of humorous way. And there the court said, nope, you're linking a whole religion with terrorism, and that is not allowed in relation to speech. If I'm targeting somebody because of your religious characteristic, or your religion or your ethnicity or whatever, we do have limits under ECHR law. But I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah. In this case, the minister initially said, or I don't know, I'm not sure if she said it, but the police said this, that there was a photo of her father in one of the tweets, and her concern was to protect her family and her children. And she wanted to act a little bit like proactively. So is the exposure of family members, for example, like the children or even your father, a legitimate reason for restricting this type of freedom of expression?
Within the framework of public international law, within the framework of European law, the way that, parody has been interpreted by the court, I can't see that would be enough of a justification. Freedom of expression is a fundamental freedom. Yeah.
What would be, are there any differences from the US position?
Yeah.
So what is the position in the United States, first of all? And if we can make reference to the banning of Trump from Twitter, and if it is relevant to this discussion, I mean, do you have an opinion on that?
Yes, I don't know if you're going to like it, but...
Well, one of my good colleagues, Laris Vrahimis, who sent us a message as well here, I know that he is against the banning of Trump, so you should be careful on what you're going to say.
I am too, so okay.
Okay, let's see the U.S. position on the matter.
Okay.
In the freedom of expression, okay?
Yeah, so the U.S. has the First Amendment to its constitution, which essentially prohibits Congress from making any restriction to inter alia, the freedom of expression. So in the US, we've had cases. I can give you a couple of names because I know lots of lawyers watch this. So Rav versus St. Paul, whereby a young group of KKK went into the yard of an African-American family, put in this huge cross, which was flaming, and ran away. And the US Supreme Court was like, yep, this is free speech. You know, we can't limit it. Or, for example, another important case, Snyder versus Phelps. Now, this is a very interesting case whereby there was a soldier who died of non-combat wounds, but anyway, he died. And it was his funeral. And there's this Westboro Baptist Church which go to the funerals of different soldiers and put up these. Have you ever seen these banners like saying, "Thank God for dead soldiers," "God hates America," blah blah blah, because of the fact that they consider that the U.S. military is too lenient towards LGBT rights, or particularly the rights of homosexuals.
Okay.
So they put up all these posters outside his funeral, and his father sued them. And this reached the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was like, nope, there's no issue here. They're allowed to do that. That is freedom of expression. Yeah.
I mean, if this happened in Europe, it would be the other way around, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's the point I want to make, that Europe has a completely different approach to the freedom of expression, particularly because of our history with the Holocaust. Nazis, the Holocaust, which gave rise to, the Council of Europe and all that. So the US, it's very different in terms of freedom of expression. However, I must say that things may be changing there as well, particularly in terms of online media. So I can give you an example. We have, again, I'll refer to the Act for the lawyers, the Communications and Decency Act, and Section 230, if I'm not mistaken, therein protects platforms and any internet intermediaries for liability. In terms of, let's say, if I put up something on Facebook which is hateful, then Facebook shouldn't be liable. But even that, Trump started it, Biden continued it, may be up to change very soon. So,
so it's like a shield protecting the social media from liability, right? This thing.
Exactly.
And it is about Facebook, Twitter.
Internet intermediaries more generally.
And this is not the case in Europe anyway.
No.
For the same social media platforms. I mean, in Europe, they are liable for libel and slander and so on, right?
And not only. In Europe, we have started, and this is a report that we did, Justice here issued 2 reports in the past year or so in relation to this, how the German Network Enforcement Act, the NetzDG, which essentially tells platforms like Facebook, you have 24 hours to remove hate speech or else you're going to pay, right?
Okay.
This opens up, this big pressure on big IT companies to have to quickly remove hate speech from their platforms. And this thing that started in Germany, we've shown how it's impacted countries like Venezuela, different countries which may not have the rule of law that Germany does. And if you go on the website, which we can mention at the end of our project, we have a link to these reports. And this is very, very dangerous.
So this is applicable in Germany, Natalie, this law?
Yeah.
Okay.
But now we want to do the same thing on a European level, the Digital Services Act. And what's happened is that Germany has this since 2017, and France tried to do this with the Avia law, but the French Constitutional Council basically said, whoa, hang on a second, 24 hours to remove speech? This is not good. It's too quick. It's going to put too much pressure on companies and too much pressure on the freedom of expression. So that was struck down. So France, in my opinion, did a good job. But what we're seeing is that at a European level, so EU level, now we want to reformulate the stuff, and we're trying to pass this Digital Services Act, which essentially is going to be a European norm, a European law.
Will it be a regulation or a directive?
It's at the moment we're still under a proposal, negotiation, blah blah blah. And we were slightly worried about that, to be honest.
So what would be the purpose of this act?
Inter alia, to impose liability on internet intermediaries like the NetzDG does, for example. at the risk of, different things. So we do see slowly that there's a creep up on these social media platforms. And I just prepared, I just put something here because I wouldn't remember this. Okay, since the NetzDG, we've had a huge increase in removals from online social media, because these companies are more afraid now. They're like, my God, if I might pay a 50 million euro penalty, then I better be safe than sorry, right? So I've got some figures for you here, whereby we've got a huge, where did I put them? We have a huge increase in the number of removals. And a lot of these removals, even 80 to 90% of hate speech removals on platforms like Facebook, happen even before you, the user, have reported it, through automated mechanisms, algorithms, not humans. This is where we've come to when it comes to freedom of expression.
How does the algorithm understand whether some post is hate speech or not?
It doesn't. That my opinion is that it doesn't. It can't. No algorithm can understand the nuance of language and, embrace the nuance of, I don't know, humor or parody or. And I can give you an example, a very good example. Terms used by communities, so to empower themselves. The term queer, for example, an algorithm designed by someone who considers the term queer to be hateful will pick up on the speech of the minority that we're trying to protect. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. Whereas that minority is actually using the term queer as a term of empowerment. So I don't see how an automated mechanism or any algorithm which is designed anyhow by a human who probably has, some kind of bias can regulate speech. And I think we should really take this seriously, because social media is the framework through which the majority of us are expressing themselves. It's including minorities. Think of the Arab Springs, Arab Spring without social media. Think of, increasing awareness of gender issues in some Southeast Asian countries without social media. How can I give this power not only to a non-judicial body, but to an automated mechanism at the risk of a fine? I think it's absolutely ridiculous.
But they are private companies at the end of the day, aren't they?
They're private companies, and this is exactly the problem, because private companies, apart from some, guiding principles of the UN, are not bound by international human rights law. And we really need to get our act together, because people are being silenced on social media, and free speech is deteriorating. And the fact that they're private companies, but at the same time, they do constitute the central marketplace of ideas and expression, is something we need to take seriously as, liberal democracies, if we want to at least pretend to be liberal democracies, rather than imposing penalties on those companies for not acting quickly enough.
So, okay, before we go to the Trump example, I will post here what Laris sent us, and I want you to comment on it.
It's very stressful that they can comment while I'm speaking.
Yeah, well, okay, but it's a good comment actually. ES against Austria upheld a blasphemy conviction. Are we cherry picking, or is it that we have different rules for different religions and sensitivities? I, for one, think that the ECHR is a serious threat to free speech and should not be allowed to set the standard for a democratic liberal society. Ouch.
Definitely not. Definitely. Sorry, I definitely agree. Exactly what Mr. Brahim says. Yeah. Yes. And actually, myself and the director of Justitia, Jacob Machagama, he and I have written a very interesting. I shouldn't say it myself, but it's a very interesting a paper on exactly what Mr. Brahim is saying, that the ECHR is losing the plot, but. The reason I relied on those cases for the Duchess of Yolu incident, I'll tell you why. Because when the story happened with the teacher, the ombudsperson, I think it was, came out and cited all these old cases of the ECHR. And then when the Duchess of Yolu case came about, I'm like, okay, so now that the ECHR actually has, cases which go against what you're doing, you forget about it. So I think it was I wanted to remind, there are very few cases of the ECHR that I actually agree with. I agree with none of the hate speech cases. I don't agree with the blasphemy cases, but these couple of cases I think were good and kind of proved the point I wanted to make,
Yeah, but is the ECHR a serious threat to free speech, you think, as Larry here suggests?
Yep. I definitely, I would definitely agree with that, particularly within the framework of blasphemy, so the ES case, but also and especially in the framework of hate speach. And if you want, I can give you an example.
Yeah, give us an example. Okay.
So I'll give you the example of Norwood versus the UK. Okay, so there was this guy who, he was a member of the British National Party, to the far right. And he put a poster on his window. So if you were walking outside his house, you could see this poster. And it was a picture of the Twin Towers of the US in flames. And then it was a crescent with the symbol of Islam with an X on it, and it said "Islam out of Britain, protect the British people." Okay, and he got a criminal conviction, and he went to the ECHR, and he's like, "This is my freedom of expression. I didn't incite violence. I didn't incite, anything. I'm just putting out my ideas." And the ECHR was like, "Sorry, we're not even going to look at your case, i.e. conduct the legal case of proportionality, necessity under Article 10. We're kicking you out using Article 17, which is the non-abuse clause of the ECHR. For me, that is the epitome of how the ECHR is slowly degrading freedom of expression. And on our website, we have a hate speech database where we have done a qualitative and quantitative analysis of all the ECHR hate speech cases. And we found that only in nearly 1 out of 3 cases does the ECHR actually uphold the freedom of expression.
1 out of 3 cases?
Yes, nearly 1 out of 3 cases. And these are all, free and open access for anyone to look at. We can give the website.
Is it the Future Speech project that you are working?
Yes, that website.
Yeah, so I will post the link in the notes, in the comments here. Actually, it's very interesting, this project that you are working on. So let me put this here as well. So can we put like Europe on the one side and America on the other side?
Yeah.
So are they complete opposite? You think? I mean, there isn't any middle ground.
There is a middle ground, but that's another country. There is a
Which one?
I would say South Africa. And this is what we're trying to look at. Because essentially what we're trying to do at the Future of Free Speech and at Justitia is we're not absolutists. We realize that things go bad, right? We need, however, to find a formula which is protective of free speech. And there is a case, it's still pending at the Supreme Court of South Africa, the case of Quilane. I don't know if I've pronounced it well, Quelane, which essentially is a hate speech case. It's got to do with homophobic speech. And the way that the South African Constitutional Court has examined the issue of hate speech, the nuance and the substance that it's given to freedom of expression and the limits is something that I haven't seen in Europe on a European level. And I've only seen in Norway. I've never seen it in the ECHR. So I think if people are trying to look at a kind of middle ground, they can't handle the absolutist approach of the US, because I will never convince the European Union or the Council of Europe to adopt that, right? We have a different history, we have different ideas. So the middle ground, I would say that if anyone's interested, is to look at Norway and South Africa. And we're trying to build quite a bit of work, particularly on South Africa, which we will be sharing.
Yes, but okay, if we see the example of President Trump last week and the incident that took place there, And eventually Twitter had to suspend him, and the same with Facebook. The founder of Facebook made a statement, and he said that the account is suspended because of hate speech. And we have seen the results of this, of the hate speech of President Trump, of people entering into the Capitol and doing all these things. Eventually 4 people died, or 5. So what is your take on that? What do you think? Were the social platforms right or correct? I mean, what's your opinion?
Okay, my opinion is that it's got 3 parts, my opinion. The first thing, let's remember what the part of Trump's tweet was really focused on by the platforms. I've copied it here. Be there, will be wild, right? Okay. Is that an imminent call for violence? Does that mean that there's a direct link between be there, it will be wild, and the actual violence that occurred? That's the first thing.
It depends which the audience is, isn't it? I mean,
yes. But the general comments of the United Nations, General Comment 34, which is like a framework that we should all follow when it comes to freedom of expression, says that the mere risk of violence, doesn't necessarily mean that we can actually limit expression. We have to have something more substantial. And be there, will be wild. I'm looking at it again. I'm not sure that we can link. That's the first thing. The second thing is, what happened in the US is not necessarily a result of a tweet or a Facebook post or whatever. I'll give you an example. If I have a temperature, I have a temperature now, I have a fever, and I take Panadol, right? My fever may go for a while, but the virus is still in my body. It's not going to go, right? I'm going to have to take antibiotics, or like have some orange juice, or go for a run, or whatever. It's the same thing. Removing speech isn't going to solve a fundamental, a society where there are fundamental differences between groups, whereby discrimination is rooted at its core, where there is so much anger that has been developed because of a variety of social, economic, political factors. You see, throwing it all down to a tweet, I think is very dangerous, because at the same time, if I start removing that, then I can give the chance to Belarus saying, oh, that tweet was probably was going to cause violence, so let's ask Twitter to block all these people, or let's go and arrest all these other people, or Russia to use the anti-propaganda law, the gay propaganda law. Let's give the chance to whatever other country that's authoritarian to just silence everyone. We have to be very careful what we're doing on Twitter.
Yes, Natalie. Okay, but to take the other side, even in the example that you gave, if you don't take the Panadol, your condition will worsen and the fever will go up. So it will not solve the problem. But on the other hand, can you leave it? I mean, essentially, you are suggesting that it should be totally free, right? Totally unregulated. So what would be the limits then?
I don't need to take Panadol. I can take antibiotics, which are stronger. So if I really want to change in terms of the way our societies are functioning, as manifested on social media, then we have to really start building democracies, right? Because they are deteriorating. That's the first thing. The second thing that I'd like to say was that I don't consider that it should be completely unregulated. So for example, the case in New Zealand with the terrorist attack, it was live streamed on Facebook for several minutes. Of course, I wouldn't agree with any of that, but I need an imminent call for violence if I'm going to start setting, these kind of prototypes for restricting expression. And I need the other thing that I think is very important for this. There's an academic, I think he's Scandinavian. His surname is Avendal, I think. He has done extensive research on Western Europe and Northern Europe. And he demonstrates that countries which are more restrictive of expression can have a certain outcome, which is very dangerous, i.e. more physical violence. If I don't have, the frame of expression to vent that anger, I may move to, more physical violence. So that's my take on Trump. I told you probably wouldn't like it, but I find it difficult. I find that it doesn't match international human rights standards. I find it doesn't match what the UN has said in its General Comment 34. Saying that, however, the former Special Rapporteur of the UN, David Kaye, who is a legend of free speech, he was probably, a wonderful Special Rapporteur. He predicted the violence that was going to emanate from Trump's tweets. So. I mean, there's no one answer.
Okay. So another interesting aspect of the Trump example is that we have a private company like Facebook essentially banning the President of the United States from its platform. I mean, this aspect is also amazing, isn't it? It's like Facebook undertaking a police role. Yeah. And. I mean, this is something. What Facebook did is something that should be done by the government, by the courts, presumably not by the company itself. I mean, should Facebook or Twitter be regulated in such a way so that they don't decide for themselves who to allow on the platform and whom not?
Yeah, and that's the opinion of the former Special Rapporteur in his report on online hate speech. He was like, these are decisions that have to be taken by the court of law. Freedom of expression is a fundamental right. We cannot have a private company which is not bound by international human rights law, which is not bound by Article 19, deciphering on these kind of things. And the fact that an private company is playing with or being able to remove the president of the US from its platform just demonstrates the situation that we're in. So I think we really need to reimagine how this regulation is to take place. And we have to, it's very easy to say, oh, it's hateful, let's take it off. Yes, but think of the backside to that. Think of the other argument. Think of the impact of removal on the people that hate. They're not going to stop being racist, and they're not going to stop being homophobic, and they're not going to stop being transphobic, are they? Trump still believes what he believes.
Yeah. So let me read you some comments. Christodoulos Polikarpou says, amazing perspective. I think he means perspective on freedom of speech. I never had any idea the full length how societies and persons can express themselves wherever they come from. And then he said that she's a genius. And Andrea says, view on Mark Meehan case. He recorded his girlfriend's pack responding to statements such as seeing help. Do you know this case? What is it about?
It's a Scottish case.
Okay.
With the dog raising his hand whenever Mark said, hi, Hitler.
Ah, okay.
The dog was putting the hand up, and he was found guilty of a hate crime.
And you disagree?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Scotland has taken a dangerous route in terms of this. They're proposing a bill which is very, very, very broad in terms of hate crime and hate speech. And we participated in the consultation. Again, it's available on the website if anyone wants to have a look at.
And then Andreas also says that Donald Trump being banned from social media is a dangerous distraction. Okay, yes. So he agrees with you. Christos Poujouris says you have freedom of speech when you do speak. Yeah, that's true as well. What is your opinion on the Cypriot society? As a society, are we conservative? Are we liberal? Are we pro-free speech? I mean, do you have an opinion on that? I mean, generally speaking, would you like to share it with us?
Okay. I'll probably never get another invite to a Cypriot podcast again. Anyway, no, listen, I like the question because I think that we're really getting, a lot of us are changing. That's one thing in a positive way. However, I do think that we need to look at our society within the framework of history. Did we really pass a period of enlightenment? Did we really have all those historical moments that other countries had? Whether that had to do with art, whether that had to do with literature, the general enlightenment period. What is our history? Did we ever have access to develop in the same way as other cultures and societies have had? I don't believe we have, right? I believe that we're at a slower pace at the moment. But I do believe, despite the fact that I'm completely frustrated also by the teacher's example and by the Twitter example with the Duchess of Yolu, that as a civil society, these blatantly arbitrary examples are kind of connecting us together to make, a stronger kind of change. So, but there is a deep conservative aspect to the way we live in all spheres, not just freedom of expression, whether that's LGBT rights, whether that's the institution of marriage, whether that's, anything. And it's slowly developing. I don't think we should just ignore everything. There is a development, but we are having, a plethora of issues. And what I do say is that if we look at the different rights and the different minorities, in inverted commas, that are victims of the discrimination that Cypriot society has, they're all interconnected, right? And they all stem from this patriarchal, ethnocentric society, whether that's a pushback of a boat of people, leaving war, to the fact that if I'm a lesbian, I cannot have adopt a baby with my girlfriend, for example. I think they're all interlinked, and it's phenomena that have, underlined our society for quite a while. But I do think that our biggest hope is what I said before, civil society coming together.
Do you study the decisions of the Cypriot courts on libel cases and slander? And because recently there has been some move, I would say, by the Supreme Court towards freedom of expression. There were 2-3 key cases against newspapers, and the Supreme Court came out for freedom of expression, for criticism and all these things. So there is some movement there as well, even though generally speaking, I would agree with you, with your assessment about the kind of society we are. What about fake news? Christodoulos is asking here. Are fake news part of the freedom of speech?
So fake news, misinformation, disinformation, again, we don't have an actual definition. Again, we've seen a lot of things happening during COVID when it comes to misinformation and disinformation. We saw a lot of laws being passed around the globe to tackle, fake news. We don't have as much substance in terms of judicial decisions and legislation when it comes to fake news, because it's a newer phenomenon. And the other very important thing is that the platforms themselves, like Facebook, they do not restrict fake news as they do hate speech. They do like this, apart from COVID, misinformation on vaccines, other stuff, they do like this notice, this may be wrong, or it's been fact-checked. So it's fact checkers now. Yeah, that's it, with fake news. They employ these different people who have the absolute truth, apparently, to check if what you said is fake news. Okay, and I'm asking myself, so how do they have the absolute truth? I want to find it too. And who checks them? I don't know. But in a nutshell, fake news is not as regulated as hate speech in terms of actually removing the content, apart from COVID. And here I found what I was looking for before, by the way, the figures. Can I tell you that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so in the first quarter of 2020, Facebook removed 9.6 million pieces of hateful content. And this rose to 22.5 million in the second quarter of 2020.
Okay, only Facebook?
This is just Facebook.
All right.
And if you think about it, look at this. Users post over 500 hours of videos to YouTube every minute, 481,000 tweets on Twitter every minute, and Facebook's over 1.7 billion daily active users post billions of comments every day. No human reviewer, no court of law can handle this sheer amount of data.
Yeah.
But the answer isn't a robot or an algorithm or an automated mechanism. The answer is, in my opinion, self-regulation. In terms of, I tell Facebook the kind of thing I want to see. If I want to see a dog saying Hail Hitler and raising his hand or whatever that mark case was, let it be. But otherwise, I don't see, how could a court deal with all that?
Yeah.
I mean,
But is it what you are suggesting feasible? I mean, is it possible for this, you think?
Yeah. And I've actually seen references to self-regulation in several reports, bodies, of different bodies, international bodies. And it's something that I really think there's space to look at in terms of self-regulation. And, you said to me before, so does that mean that everything has to be free? I think this is a good kind of middle ground, this self-regulation. I make my what I want to see tailored on my needs. Otherwise, the figures, that I've just given you are mad.
Yeah. You know what I think? I think that two things. One, that we are moving towards a social media dictatorship of a sort. And the second thing is that gradually we will have a kind of compartmentalization. In other words, people will start creating their own private networks. And they will talk to themselves like what Trump said the other day, that he's considering of doing his own Trump Twitter network so that the people that follow him would use that. I mean, do you see that as well?
Definitely.
That is a trend.
Definitely, and we've seen that already. People who have been kicked off mainstream platforms go to other communication mechanisms with end-to-end encrypted, mechanisms. We've seen that a lot. So it's up to us, and when I say us, I mean civil society, the UN, which is more speech protective than the European Court of Human Rights, as Mr. Vahimi said. Civil society, tech companies to actually come together and see how this is going to be dealt with. Otherwise, there's going to be a hub of all the haters empowered together on other fora, and then we'll see how good that's going to be.
Okay, so can you also tell us a couple of words about Justitia? And I'm posting the link now. What is this? An NGO? What is it?
It's a think tank. It's a think tank in Denmark, working on a variety of issues related to the rule of law and human rights, fundamental freedoms, and I only work on the freedom of expression aspect. So we're leading the project that I told you with the University of Columbia and the University of Aarhus. And essentially we're trying to shape or help shape policy which really reflects liberal democracy. And our outputs are always research informed. We do the science first, and then we're going to put out a report. And in addition with reports, in addition with policy making, we also have very nice outputs for lawyers and other professionals. So, for example, the hate speech database. You just go to it, you click on a theme, you click on the case. We've given you a summary, and if you want to read the full case, the link is there. Or, for example, we've made a document with all the hate speech laws from all the countries of the world. So we have also sources for professionals and academics.
A very good friend and colleague has a question for you, Natalie. Is my friend Nikos Panagiotou, and the question is, Dr. Archiviadou, I agree that we should be very careful when limiting freedom of speech in any way or form. However, please share your view on whether the extreme right is using the free speech argument to promote their agendas, and how Europe should treat such behaviors.
Well, I tried to answer that in my PhD.
Give us a 30-second answer. Give us your 2 cents here.
Okay, there is no answer to that. Of course, any extreme right, left, even the center, we have to be careful in terms of how we are actually defining, the political spectrum. Are using mechanisms of democracy. So as the propaganda minister of the Nazis said, it's the best joke of democracy that it gives the mechanisms to the haters, the people who want to destroy it, to actually do so. So I wouldn't say, however, I definitely think that any group, any person will use expression to put forth the views that they want to put forth. But I think it's very dangerous to immediately label that as extreme right, or immediately impose the doctrine of militant democracy, which is basically to silence their speech. And we need to be very careful of what happens when we actually do silence the free speech of others. We can turn them into martyrs. And we saw that in Golden Dawn, for example, in Greece.
Yes. And I mean, take the example of the 7 November in Greece. I mean, these guys, they had an ideological, let's say, basis. They were not in the vacuum, but still they were terrorists. I understand what you want to say, but on the other hand, my instinct tells me that there needs to be some control somewhere.
Definitely, I agree. If I'm calling for violence, if there is an imminent call for violence in my speech, right, then, as the UN says, there should be regulation. If, however, I'm putting my Palestinian passport on Instagram and it's removed by Instagram because of this craze on hate speech, as Bella Hadid, the model, did a few months ago, or no, maybe a year ago, then I've lost the plot. So what the previous person said, that is the idea of militant democracy developed by Karl Lowenstein after just before the Holocaust. But we have to be very careful, especially when the regulator, as you said, is a private company. Yeah.
And also, Nikos followed up with another comment about the fact that some people have more exposure compared to others, and the fact that people who have more exposure due to their privilege and or authority and position can spread hate in a more significant way that might actually endorse violence, like President Trump, for example.
Yeah.
And he says, see Houthis and Tutsi for the latter. I mean, is this a case?
Hutus and Tutsis, the two ethnic groups of Rwanda.
Okay.
But the Hutus and the Tutsis were the powerful minority, though. They were the elites. And it was the Hutus that came and used the radio. I mean, if you go on YouTube and you put radio Mille Collines, so the radio of 1,000 hills, and you listen to the calls for genocide uttered on that radio show, and you compare that with, let me just find it again. What did he say, Trump? Be there, we'll be wild. Then you can see what I mean.
Okay.
Imminent calls for violence, imminent calls for something dangerous. YouTube it. It's the 2-minute radio show. Makes your skin shiver.
Savas is asking you to comment, if familiar, on Austria versus David Irving's case. He received a 3-year jail sentence back in 2006.
Yes, to comment on the case. Definitely. I think that all these cases, the revisionist cases, people who are doubting the Holocaust or the extent of the Holocaust have been treated very disproportionately by the European Court of Human Rights. Why do I say that? Because the use of Article 17, the non-destruction clause that I mentioned in Norwood, apart from Norwood, which involved Islamophobic speech, it has been used only when it comes to anti-Semitism and revisionist speech. So what's going on at an ECHR level is that if you're saying something about the Holocaust, maybe I'm just going to kick you out using Article 17. But if you say you hate gay people and they cause AIDS and pedophilia, like it happened in Vejoland versus Sweden, then I'm not going to kick you out using Article 17, but I am going to conduct a legal test under Article 10. So I'm creating this envy kind of envy between the different protected characteristics.
Okay.
So I don't agree with the way revisionists are treated. There is no person in their right mind who would say that the Holocaust didn't happen. But we can only say that because we had the freedom to research, we had the freedom to express ourselves, we had the freedom to document from the Nuremberg trial, for example. What if we didn't have expression? What if we didn't have access to information, which is part of free speech? Would we be able to say that? So we have to be very careful.
And finally, Andrea says the high media concentration in Cyprus reduce the freedom of press and remove an essential check and balance to an effective system of democratic governance. I mean, yeah, I agree with Andreas. I wrote several pieces about this as well. Yeah. Okay, and Magda says, what's the name of the radio in Rwanda calling for the genocide?
It's the radio of the 1,000 Hills. Hi, Magda. And in French, if you just Google Radio Mille Collines, or I can send you the link and you can put it up. Or Magda, I can send it to you later.
Yeah. And Andreas also put us here a note about the relationships of the media in Cyprus with the government and everything. And I mean, the connections are there. Everybody knows them. I wrote a Facebook piece some time ago about what is going on. Okay, so Natalie, thank you very much.
I thank you.
So the Duchess of Yolu case was useful after all, right? So it gave us the chance to, you wrote the article, gave us the chance to have this discussion. Are you optimistic about the future of freedom of speech in Cyprus?
As things stand, no. I think things need to, I'm always optimistic, but I think we need a change in a lot of things. People have been, same people around for too long in a lot of frameworks. But the Duchess of Yolu example, for me, is an embodiment of arbitrariness. And in the case, the Portuguese case, the ECHR actually said, if you are bringing in the criminal law framework within the realm of parody and humor, that has a chilling effect on free speech, you know? And I felt chills in my spine when I saw what was going on. So, yes, I mean, we should kind of take a step back and see what's actually going on.
Okay, so great. It was a great discussion. Let me tell our viewers and listeners that the episode will be uploaded on YouTube, on iTunes, Spotify, and Podbean tomorrow. Of course, it is live now on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and you can view it later on as well. But in any case, it will be on our social platforms as long as they are free. Tomorrow, I would like to thank you so much for accepting the invitation, for giving us your ideas about this very, very, very important matter. And I hope we can have a new discussion in the future about this and other matters that you are researching. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to say something, though. I thank you for the invitation, but also thank you for letting me, because expressing an opinion whereby freedom of expression is viewed in the way that I view it is not always easy. And you really were great in that, you know. Yeah. I think it's important to have that, you know, kind of counter dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, you have very interesting views. I don't agree on everything, but...
No, I know.
You understood, right? Well, I'm a Cypriot after all.
No, but that's the beauty of expression, isn't it? And then
it is, yes.
Dialogue.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, Natalie. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, good night, everyone. I will see you in the next few days with another interesting podcast. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.